know, some people would probably say, how could you marry a man who is a murderer?
How could I write to Britain's most dangerous prisoner?
When I fell in love, it cost me everything. It cost me my career, it cost me my children.
If you really love someone, there isn't anything that you wouldn't do.
He may actually have to serve out the death penalty and be put to death.
I don't think anyone can cope with someone they love being executed.
When does it go away? When does the pain go away?
For many women, the prospect of marrying a violent criminal or even a murderer whilst they're in prison seems unthinkable. But for some women, prison bars are no obstacle in their quest to find love. Many are willing to sacrifice the best years of their lives to be with their prison partner. But romance behind barbed wire doesn't always guarantee a happy ending.
Why are you marrying him? Because I love him.
Sorry. Right. What's so lovely about him?
What is so bad about him?
In June 2001, 31-year-old divorcee Sarah Ali Ahmed hit the headlines when she married Britain's most notorious prisoner, Charles Bronson, after a whirlwind romance.
I simply followed my heart, as I do in everything I do.
The relationship with Bronson shocked family and friends, who couldn't understand how a translator in a women's centre could fall in love with such a violent man.
I come from a very strict Muslim family, and at the age of 19, I got married. It was a forced, arranged marriage. He was a very abusive man from the beginning. I fell pregnant with Sami, my daughter.
Having broken free from an arranged and abusive marriage, Sarah didn't expect to find her future husband in the tabloids.
I didn't think much of that photo, and then I just put it away. A few hours later, I picked it up again, and I just had to look at it.
Sarah had become infatuated with a man she'd never met. Britain's longest-serving prisoner. Born Michael Peterson, the former bare-knuckle boxer changed his name to Charles Bronson in honor of the lead actor in the Death Wish movies. Originally convicted for armed robbery at the age of 21 and sentenced to 7 years, he was given a life sentence after holding a prison education officer hostage. He's currently served 30 years behind bars, 24 of which have been in solitary confinement.
I was aware of the fact that, he went to prison for armed robbery. He took hostages and he threatened people. But I knew very well that he wasn't a murderer or a child killer or anything like that. And something in me said that he wasn't as evil as people described him. I tried and tried to stop thinking about him, this person in the newspaper. But it didn't work.
Despite his history of violence, Sarah sent a letter to Bronson in prison.
It wasn't a love letter or anything. I described how I felt about him. I gave him my address, my phone number, and I think I sent him a photo of myself, and I wrote back of the photo that I'm not trying to impress you, I just want you to see the person behind this letter. And then one day, 2-3 days later, I received a letter. I just opened the letter and I saw it was him, and I just screamed. He seemed quite a nice person, and he said he was fascinated that this is how I felt. And he was honored, and then he went on, and he told me a little bit about himself. And then a couple of days later, he actually phoned me, And I picked up the phone, and in a very deep voice, he said, "Hello, Sarah, this is Charlie." I said, "Who?" He said, "Charles Bronson."
After just 3 months of correspondence, Sarah visited Bronson in prison.
I walked in, and there he was. When I saw him, I felt as though the whole room lit up. He came up to me and then gave me a big hug and a kiss on the lips. And I was even more convinced that he was the one.
Meeting Sarah in person appeared to have a dramatic effect on Bronson. The man who had spent 24 years in solitary wrote her a passionate letter.
For me, you must realize I'm obsessed with your beauty, with your body, with your mind. It is me who is now obsessed. Before even I visited him, in one phone call, he said to me, he talked about marriage. He said, "Do you know that we're going to get married one day?" I said, "Yes, I do."
After only a few months of knowing this violent convict, Sarah was prepared to take a significant step forward in their relationship.
I walked in, and then we all sat down, and then he got the ring out and put it on me and said, "Will you marry me?" I said, "Yes."
Leaving her home today, Sarah Raymond in no doubt as to why she's marrying one of Britain's most dangerous men.
I mean, I knew that I was marrying him for love. This time, nobody was forcing me like my first marriage.
Wonderful. Very happy. Not nervous at all. Are you looking forward to seeing him? Definitely.
I remember staring at him for a while, He stood out. I thought, wow.
After the wedding, Bronson was escorted back to his cell by prison officers. His bride went to the reception party, alone.
That was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. At one point, he previously recorded a tape, and he asked his friend to play it.
Babe, I'm no longer a danger. I changed the day I married you. New chapter of my life. Our life, our future. People need to understand that and get away from all this nonsense of Britain's most dangerous man. What a load of crap. What a load of bollocks. I'm Britain's most loved man.
I was all right until then. And when I heard his voice, I think that was it. I couldn't hold myself anymore. I ended up crying or something.
Marrying a dangerous prisoner seems perverse. But what drives a working journalist to knowingly marry a convicted murderer?
When I walked into the death house, one of the bloodiest prisons in the United States of America, and my entire world came to a halt.
One woman has devoted the last 25 years of her life to a convicted murderer serving a life sentence in prison. For a quarter of a century, she's lived in the hope that one day this killer will be released.
I have some of Billy's clothes here, and I used to keep them in the closet with my clothes. I would think every morning, oh, I'll have a husband coming home someday, but it just became too painful, so I put the clothes away, and I kind of have shut the door on the future. If it ever happens, it happens, but I don't have much belief that it ever will. I was a reporter for the CBS affiliate in Baton Rouge, and I went to the prison to do the series on the death penalty.
Some say killing a man in the electric chair is murder. Others say society is entitled to revenge. We'll examine that question tomorrow. I'm Jody Bell for Newsline 9 at Angola, Louisiana.
When I walked into the death house at Angola, one of the bloodiest prisons in the United States of America, with a terrible reputation, walked into the death house carrying the lights,
with a photographer behind me with the camera, put the lights down, and looked up and saw a man, and my entire world came to a halt in that moment.
Rolling? Okay, we have the pre-camera statement, but I'd appreciate it if you'd tell me again your arguments why you should be released.
Because for during the past 2.5 years, Department of Corrections has released 24 convicted murderers.
He was dressed in these perfectly pressed blue jeans with creases down the front, beautifully starched blue jean jacket, just absolutely gentleman's quarterly kind of look, just perfectly polished. In fact, I thought he was a guard. And then, however, within minutes when I was introduced to him, I realized, oh, this is the inmate they wanted me to meet. And then I gathered myself together and said, you're here to do a story, and I went on and set about doing the story.
The man Jody had fallen for was Billy Wayne Sinclair. He was sentenced to death in 1965 for killing a clerk in a Louisiana convenience store during a botched holdup. He was 20 years old. He's now in his 40th year behind bars.
When I was interviewing him, it was very hard to keep my mind on the questions.
We asked that question probably more than, why do you think you should be out? I mean, what legitimate right do you have to get out? I mean, you say you're supposed to be out, why?
Well, the physical attraction was almost electric. I later learned from him it was very hard to answer the questions.
And I think during my 16 years of confinement, I've established a record of accomplishment and a record of achievement that's unparalleled, certainly by most prisoners.
I talked to him. I knew that I had nothing to fear from this man.
Yeah, I mean, what, do we go through it again?
Mm-hmm. Billy Sinclair was as thunderstruck as I was. Billy said to me, when you walked into the death house, I thought, she has come. She is here. This is the woman I was meant to have.
Jody, a married woman with 2 children, had fallen in love with a killer on death row.
When you feel I'm falling in love with someone who is in prison because they have taken the life of another human being, there's a huge taboo there, and it's very frightening.
Just 8 weeks after meeting, their relationship took on a new dimension.
At one point, he looked at me with this incredibly passionate look, and he said, we are not people who can have an affair. We have to be married. So then he said, will you marry me? And I said, yes, I will. I will marry you.
Jody Bell married Billy Wayne Sinclair in June 1982, despite knowing his crime. But for others, it's difficult to accept that the man they love could have committed murder.
Some people would probably say, how could you marry a man who is a murderer? And to them I would say, I have always known that he is not a murderer.
Sinead Hunt is a divorced single mom, bringing up her 4 children. While employed as a church worker, she met convicted murderer Kevin O'Neill at a mass at Wormwood Scrubs.
Within the context of the mass, there is the sharing of the peace. So then you go round and greet those people who are immediately around you. So that was the first time that Kevin and I met and physically touched each other.
Kevin O'Neill was convicted of murdering a man in a London squat in 1986. The prosecution described him as being a dangerous psychopath. According to press reports, he smiled as he was sentenced for a killing he carried out using glass, wire, scalding water, and a knife. His victim was tortured for 4 hours before being left to bleed to death.
I had a view of Kevin that had been presented by the press. It was a horrendous killing. It wasn't a straightforward fight in a squat, which some people would find more understandable and acceptable. But I got to know this man, and I knew that he was not a psychopath. Kevin was then dark-haired, tall. He had tattoos, a very beautiful bird tattoo and a couple of other smaller ones on his face. There was something there. I have never ever said that, that it was love at first sight, because that wasn't, but there was always something, a magic something there. There was that bond from the moment we met.
As the relationship deepened, the letters and correspondence increased.
As I got to know Kevin more, I experienced in Kevin somebody I sensed who could love me in a way that I felt that I had never been loved before. I think the main reason I had walked out on my marriage with 4 kids, I needed to be loved and cared for. And that is something that it turns out I have found in this relationship.
In September 1991, Sinead and Kevin O'Neill were married in the chapel at Her Majesty's Prison, Hull. They've now been married 14 years.
To be married and to walk out and to have to go back to your house by yourself, it hurts. We want to share a meal together. We want to wake up together, but in the morning. We want to go to bed together at night. We want to walk out of the door together instead of having to sit for 2 hours in a visits room.
When a woman marries a convicted criminal, it's as if she's imposed her own life sentence.
When I fell in love with Billy Sinclair, it cost me everything. It cost me my career. For some years, it cost me my children. It was the catalyst for my divorce. And it's cost me 25 years of the worst sort of pain I could possibly describe, terrible emotional pain. I did it because I love Billy Sinclair.
I had lost everything for him. My family, my job, my friends, the recognition that I had within the community before that as a worker in the women's centre. Young girls looked up to me, the same girls who were walking past, throwing things at me, spitting at me.
It hurts. It hurts terribly because you want to be able to live your life together and do the most ordinary of things.
A relationship with a violent prisoner crosses a boundary that many find difficult to accept. But one woman went even further. Under the very noses of authority, prison officer Tamika Green broke the ultimate taboo. She fell in love with the murderer she was guarding, risking everything.
The first time I met Edward, I was working on his wing, and he passed by, and it was during the summer. It was like July of 1998, and he had an afro, and he just passed by, and I heard someone call his name, and I was like, "Oh, so you're Green."
Edward Green was convicted of murder at the age of 18. A petty criminal with a drugs habit, he and an accomplice shot an elderly couple in their car. He'd spent 5 years on death row when he met prison officer Tamika.
When he committed the crime, I didn't know him, but from what he tells me, he was a very rebellious teenager, not very settled, just doing things for himself. He was very self-oriented, did not think about anyone else. When our relationship began, he was on a work-capable wing. When I worked on the wing, he worked as a porter. That's how we got to know each other. He was very humorous, loving, and caring. He was very strong. He was very intellectual. He taught me things about myself that I didn't even realize. Later on, as we grew closer and the the letters began, he began writing me letters. I'm like, what is he doing, you know? And then that's when our relationship progressed into a more intimate relationship.
Despite surveillance cameras and high security, Tamika managed the impossible and found a way of having secret liaisons with Green whilst he was on death row.
On the wing, there's another room. It's kind of made like an exam room of a doctor's office. And when we wanted to be alone, we would just go in that room. Oh my God. We began our relationship in September of '98. And in November of '98, I found out that I was pregnant. Edward was very happy when I told him I was pregnant. It was almost like we planned it because, I mean, we weren't taking any precautions, and we had talked about it before. Like, after the first time we made love, we talked about having a child. And he asked me, would I be willing to have his child? And apparently I told him yes.
Tamika managed to keep their relationship secret for over a year, but it was only a matter of time before she would arouse the suspicions of the prison authorities.
They found letters in Edward's cell that was from me. And they called me down to the warden's office. I was very embarrassed that they had found my letters because they were personal letters. So he asked, you know, did you do such and such? And I was like, yes. I mean, I didn't deny anything. I was very honest. They told me that it wasn't permitted for me to have a relationship with an inmate. And they told me that they were going to give me a chance to resign or I would be fired the next day. So I resigned. And after that, you know, I realized that, hey, you know, I love him. He is the man that I love. So I asked him to marry me.
On April the 11th, 1999, former prison guard Tamika married her death row lover. Although she'd sacrificed her career, she was looking forward to the birth of her child. But events were about to take a turn for the worse. The age of the internet has allowed more and more women to correspond with prisoners around the world. But few become so infatuated that they will cross the globe to meet their pen pals in person.
I didn't go out looking for love. I wasn't looking for that, didn't expect to find it. I've been married twice before, and no, they haven't. They've lasted quite some time, but they haven't worked out.
Twice divorced Val Alderton is 54 years old. She's a personal care worker from Romford, Essex. She found love online when she was contacted by an organisation looking for people prepared to write to prison inmates.
I then went on the net. People's faces came up. Mark was there, and I thought, we've got a lot in common. That'd be great. So I began writing. Mark didn't want anything in return. Mark only wanted a friend that he could call a friend.
Val's pen pal is Mark Scott Thornton. He was sentenced to death for murder at the age of 19. Described in court as being worse than a wild animal, he abducted a young mother from her car, shot her once in the chest and twice in the back. He's 31 years old and has currently served 10 years on death row.
It's something he's got to have on his conscience, but I wasn't involved in that. I wasn't there. I didn't walk in his shoes, so I don't know what led up to that. But this was a lot of years ago. This was over 10 years ago. How many of us can actually say we're the same person as we were 10 years ago? We liked the same music. Then there was the countryside. We both loved the countryside. His fantasy place was sort of like a lighthouse on a beach or just off a beach, and that was mine as well. And there was such a lot of things like that that we just, and I just thought, oh, he's on my wavelength.
Over the next 8 months, the relationship progressed through letters, although Scott Thornton had not yet seen her photograph.
The first picture I ever sent him, because I thought, if I'm going to go and see him at any time, I don't want him to be scared. So I sent him a picture and I thought, well, that'll scare him off, you know. And he wrote back and said I looked very sexy and beautiful. And I wrote back immediately and said, I don't want the bullshit. Don't give me rubbish. And he said, no. He said, I want 100 pictures and 1,000 more. And you can never send me enough pictures. I think you're really lovely. Then when I decided I was going to go to America to have a holiday, I thought I'll go to Florida, have a nice hot holiday. And he said, well, you can always come and see me. And it was said in jest. This was during a phone call. So I said, yeah, OK, why not? Where the heck is San Francisco? I've visited prisons over here, and the visiting is held in halls, basically like a gymnasium with lots of tables and chairs. But over there I went in and it was rows of cages. Guard took me into the cage where they were going to bring Mark in and sat down. And next thing I know, Mark is stood at the door and with his hands behind his back where they uncuffed him and came in, and we immediately just hugged. Everything else didn't matter around. It's, well, I've got you some food, and we'd sit there eating and drinking coffee, and it was magical because there was no nervousness. We were just two great mates, you know, two great friends. When I actually left, he was crying, and I was crying. Sorry. It just feels like part of me's missing, not to be there with him.
As she prepared to fly back to the UK, Val decided to follow her heart. Acting on impulse, she proposed.
I really can't bear to be without him. I need to be with him as much as possible. But I wonder if he really feels the same as I do. So I went and got the soppiest, loveliest Valentine card that they had and just wrote in there, will you marry me? And then waited and waited and waited, and letters were coming and still no mention. And I thought, OK, well, I won't mention it anymore. So I was still writing. And then the letter came. He wrote back and said, yes, 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 a whole page full of yeses, and said, did you think it would be anything different? Why on earth didn't you ask me? To my face, he said, and then I could have smothered you with kisses and told you my answer then. I'm hoping to get married as soon as possible. I will be Mrs. Scott Thornton, yes.
Val is preparing to give up family and friends, crossing the globe to be with her death row fiancé. One woman who's already made that questionable sacrifice is 36-year-old Alessandra Scisinde.
I had a very good life in Italy. I loved it. I never was one of those that would have liked to go and live in a different country. I was perfectly happy there. I have had a few boyfriends, and what really had me disappointed was that I really wasn't feeling all, you know, this thing that everyone was talking about, you know, this big real love. I really never wanted, you know, to have a husband or a family unless it was the real one. And, you know, it happened to be him.
6 years ago, Alessandra married Sho Scisinde. In 1981, aged 26, he and an accomplice murdered a young woman who pleaded, God help me, before he shot her in the head. He has spent the last 24 years on death row.
Well, first of all, I did not marry my husband because he had done or not done something. I mean, I've met this person, and with this person, I have found a relationship that really worked, and I fell in love with this person.
Come here, John.
Sometimes we talk about his past. I like to figure out the person he was at that time. And I keep telling him I would have not liked him then. He was just so messed up.
Like many prisoner relationships, Alessandra and Shasinde first got to know each other through a lengthy correspondence.
In the 10 years that I've known Charles, I probably received, I suppose, between 500 to 1,000 letters. There has been some times where he wrote once a day. There were times where maybe a month passed, but I suppose, you know, if you really look at this, probably it's in the hundreds.
Writing is one thing, but the last time Alessandra was able to physically touch her husband was 6 years earlier.
From the moment they're sentenced on, they are pretty much, I think, considered like if they are already dead. So you've got to consider them totally untouchable. Fact is, you go to visitation and you have this glass between you and you talk through a phone. And of course, there are times where you really wish you could, for once, touch this person.
The lack of any physical relationship is a reality for most prison wives.
I've kissed Billy before. He's been in 3 or 4 different prisons. And there were some prisons where it was possible to at least exchange a meaningful kiss. But, and it was restricted to that. I don't know my husband physically.
To be intimate, the officers would have been, would have been under clear instructions not to have allowed that to happen.
I don't think I'll be sharing an intimate moment with a man when you've got 4 cameras looking down on you and there's one above you, top of your head, listening to your voice.
However, one couple did manage to achieve a close physical relationship. Texas prison guard Tamika Green lost her job when authorities discovered she was having an affair with a death row inmate. In April 1999, they got married, and she gave birth 3 months later.
He just stared at her, like in amazement. He couldn't believe that this was his creation. But he was very happy.
Tamika and Green had achieved the impossible. They called their beloved daughter Miracle.
When we would go see him, he would just like stare at her in awe.
May!
When I look at my daughter, I see Edward.
Although Green now had a daughter, he'd been living on borrowed time.
When we learned of his date of execution, we talked about how were we going to tell her that, and he told me that he wanted to be the one. He told her that today may be the last time she will see him, because tomorrow they're going to kill me. And I'm pretty sure she did not understand who they were. He asked me, how was I feeling? And I told him, I sat there and I was like, I don't know. And he said, me neither. When our visit was over, we told each other that we loved each other and that we'll see each other later. We kissed each other through the glass. And as I was walking out, I turned back around and I waved, and he waved.
That would be the last time Tamika would see her husband alive. At 12 minutes past 6, on October the 5th, 2004, convicted murderer Edward Green was executed by lethal injection.
I wanted to be at the execution because I wanted to, I guess I just wanted to see it. I wanted to be a witness of his death, but he didn't want me to, so he didn't put my name on the list, and I was very angry. It wasn't until like the next day I was home alone, and I didn't know. I just didn't know how to take it. And I was angry and I was sad all at the same time. So I called my first lady and I asked her, when does it go away? When does the pain go away? And she told me it's gonna take some time.
Edward Green was one of 59 prisoners executed in Texas last year. And there are many others, still waiting for their sentence to be carried out. Alessandra's husband is a dead man walking.
I've had 2 execution dates, and I came within 3 days the closest time.
Essex care worker Val Alderton has spent a substantial part of her modest salary travelling halfway across the world to see her death row fiancé.
It's just like coming home, because I know the hotel, I know the area, I know where the bus stop is, and I know I've got 2 or 3 days now till I see Mark. And I know that he's only about a mile down the road, and I can't wait to see him. It's been nearly 6 months since I last saw him. We've exchanged letters, loads of letters, but he's got no idea I'm coming. And I just can't wait to see him and wait to see his face. He's going to be so shocked and surprised, especially since the letters that have been going backwards and forwards since the last visit have got more serious, and with marriage intended, so all the papers have gone backwards and forwards as well. So we're just waiting now for approval from the prison.
For this visit, Val has not come empty-handed.
I got him a ring, and I've got his initials engraved on it. Inside the ring, I've actually had engraved for the long haul. So I've got to smuggle that in, so I'm going to put that on and just hopefully be able to, under the guard's watchful eye, be able to smuggle it to him.
Outside San Quentin prison, the months of separation are almost over.
So that's the ring on there, and it's got his initials on it. So hopefully I'll be able to pass it to him today, and Mark will be pleased with it, I hope.
San Quentin prison houses 640 death row inmates. They live with the reality that they could be executed at any time. Lethal injection is the favored method in the state of California, although inmates can choose death by poison gas if they wish. "2,000 miles away in Texas, Alessandra's husband, Jorge Chacinde, knows more than anyone what it's like to live on borrowed time. Living with this realization puts huge pressures on their relationship, especially when execution dates are set and then postponed with last-minute stays.
I've had 2 dates, 2 execution dates, and I came within 3 days the closest time. And even then, I always had the faith and the belief that, this isn't going to happen. The courts are going to do the right thing. And they did eventually, but, you get that close and then you start wondering about it. I've been here 23 years, going on 24 years. And over that period of time when I was first here, I tried to make friends, and I saw many of them executed. And that's a really emotional thing, seeing someone that you've grown close to. You've talked about their family, about their crime, about, their everything in their life. And you see them executed here, and you're like, well, wait a minute, I don't want to go through this anymore. So you start backing up and kind of just build a wall between you.
Shaz doesn't really talk a lot about it. I mean, sometimes when you are there, you are having your visit, and there the family of a person that's going to be executed, in a day or two, and it has happened often. Of course, it's natural that you talk about, what would happen if it was us, and the funny thing is that we can't really put ourselves there. He really believes he's gonna get out.
Even though I've always believed that eventually one day I'm going to walk out, it's still real hard for people out there to deal with what we have to deal with in here. And most people don't realize what we deal with in here.
He lives 23 hours a day in a little, 3x4 cell, right? He can't have really human contact with anyone. He is allowed to have a radio. He can't have TV. He is in total isolation.
Despite no physical contact, the regular visits from his wife are the main focus of Shisinde's existence.
You can't have any physical contact, but you can have a lot of emotional contact. And I think that's one of the things that is actually an advantage here, as opposed to people in the free world who are married. They lose the ability to have the emotional contact between themselves because they're always having the physical contact, and over a period of time it grows old. But when you don't have that, your emotions are more involved in everything, and so you have a stronger emotional contact, and I think that's what makes marriages here last longer than those out there.
I have lost a lot being with him, but to me it's never been a matter of, regretting or thinking, well, all these things that I don't have anymore ever create a burden on me. To me, just being able to see him is enough.
Alessandra's always been precious and special to me. I love her, I miss her. I'm going to keep fighting, I'm going to keep struggling, and one day I'm going to be home with her. And nothing, no matter what's going on, is going to separate us, or nothing's going to come between us. We're always going to have each other.
In the face of his brutal crime, glass barriers and enforced separation, Alessandra maintains that their love behind bars can survive. But for Val, who hoped to find love in San Quentin, things haven't gone to plan.
I expected the face to break out in a big beaming smile, and I think he was just so shocked. I don't know who he was expecting, but he certainly wasn't expecting me. The last letter I received, which was, 10 days ago, was, when are you coming back? I need to see you, I want to see you, I need some loving from you, I want to see you so much. Today, if somebody had flown across the world to see me, I know I'd have been a lot more pleased to see them. I made a bit more of an effort, irrespective of what else was going on. I'd have made more of an effort, I know that. Right this moment, I wish I was at work. Because that way it wouldn't hurt like it's hurting right this moment.
women who sacrifice their hearts to a man behind bars can pay a heavy price, often serving a life sentence of their own.
So much of Kevin's life is stuck where it was 20 years ago, and therefore, by the same token, my life has therefore become stuck around something, a terrible, terrible incident 20 years ago.
I had lost everything for him, my family, my job, my friends. The one last thing I just want to say that I still believe in love, and my soulmate is somewhere out there for me.
I don't think for a moment that he is writing to other women and he is deceiving me, and whether other people think that that's naive or not, I really don't care. Because at the end of the day, you could be living with somebody and they could still be deceiving you. They could be kissing you and saying, you're the most wonderful person on earth, and be screwing the bird down the road.
I manage because I have his daughter. I'm not going to say that my life is empty without him because he left me him. So I can't say that my life is empty. But I do miss him.
I value love above and beyond anything else, and the love that I feel for him has been reciprocated beyond anything anyone could ever imagine. Now that they have sucked all the life out of him over this 40 years that he's been incarcerated, they are handing me a physical husk of a man, if indeed he does come home.